I thought the worst part of being in the hospital would be the surgery. Turns out the worst part was coming home to discover my parents had sold my engagement ring to pay for my brother's party. A $18,000 ring. Gone. Just like that, but here's the thing about betrayal, it has a way of coming full circle. And sometimes karma doesn't just knock on the door. Sometimes she walks right into the celebration with receipts, witnesses, and a microphone. Let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about a ring. It's about a pattern that took me 28 years to finally see clearly. I'm the middle child in a family where my older brother Jake has always been the golden boy. Star athlete in high school, full scholarship to State University, landed a solid job right out of college, the kind of son parents brag about at neighborhood barbecues. Me, I was the steady one. The dependable daughter who worked 2 jobs through nursing school, paid my own way, never asked for anything. My younger sister Emma was the baby, the artistic one who could do no wrong even when she was doing everything wrong. But Jake was the crown jewel. Mom still has his high school football trophies displayed in the living room like he won the Super Bowl. When I got engaged to David last Christmas, it was the happiest moment of my life. Not just because I was marrying my best friend, but because for once I was the center of attention in my family. The ring was gorgeous, a classic solitaire setting with a 1-carat diamond that caught light like captured stars. David had saved for 2 years to buy it, $18,000. He presented it to me at Christmas dinner in front of everyone, and for once, I was the one everyone was looking at with genuine happiness. Mom cried. Dad shook David's hand for what felt like 5 minutes. Even Jake seemed genuinely happy for me, hugging me tight and saying he was proud to call David his future brother-in-law. The wedding planning started immediately. We set the date for September, picked the venue, started looking at dresses. I was floating. Finally, it was my turn to be celebrated, to be the daughter they fussed over and bragged about. Then March happened. I started having severe abdominal pain. At first, I thought it was stress from wedding planning, work, life. But when I doubled over during my shift at the hospital where I worked, yes, the irony wasn't lost on me. My colleagues practically dragged me to the ER. Appendicitis, but not the straightforward kind. Mine had complications. What should have been a simple laparoscopic procedure turned into emergency surgery when they discovered my appendix had perforated. I went from "you'll be home tomorrow" to "we need to keep you for observation" to "there's been an infection" to suddenly I was looking at a 2-week hospital stay. David was incredible. He took time off work, slept in that awful hospital chair that pretends to recline, brought me real food when the hospital meals made me nauseous. My parents visited daily for the first few days, then it became every other day, then every few days. I understood it was a long drive from their house, gas was expensive, and I was stable, just healing. On day 10 of my hospital stay, Jake called with big news. He'd been offered a promotion, a really significant one that would involve relocating to Denver. The company wanted him to start in 6 weeks, which meant he'd be leaving right after my wedding. This was his chance to really establish himself in his career, and the whole family was buzzing with excitement. "We should throw him a going-away party," Mom said during one of her visits. "Something really special. He's worked so hard for this." I agreed, of course. Jake deserved to be celebrated. I suggested maybe a nice dinner at that Italian place he loved, or a barbecue at their house with his friends. Something meaningful but not too expensive, since I knew Mom and Dad were worried about money. Dad had been laid off 6 months earlier and was still looking for work. "Oh, we're thinking bigger than that," Mom said, her eyes bright with excitement. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We want to do something he'll never forget." A real celebration. The party planning consumed every conversation after that. It would be at the fancy country club where Dad used to golf before money got tight. They'd hired a DJ, were catering from the best restaurant in town, planning a slideshow of Jake's achievements, the works. I could hear the excitement in their voices when they described the plans, and honestly, it warmed my heart. Jake had always been there for me, had helped me move apartments more times than I could count, had co-signed my student loans when my credit wasn't good enough on its own. He deserved something special. "How are you guys managing the cost?" I asked during one visit, genuinely curious but not judgmental. I knew they'd been struggling since Dad's job loss. "Don't worry about it," Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. "We're figuring it out. Family comes first, right? This is important." I was discharged on day 14, with strict instructions to take it easy for another 2 weeks. No lifting anything over 10 pounds, no driving until cleared by my doctor, minimal walking. David took more time off work to take care of me, and I felt guilty about that, but also grateful. The man was going to be my husband. This was what we signed up for in sickness and in health. The first day home, I was so exhausted I slept for 12 hours straight. The second day, I started noticing things felt different in my apartment. Little things. My jewelry box wasn't quite where I'd left it. The drawer in my nightstand was slightly open when I always kept it closed. My mail had been sorted differently than how I usually organized it. I chalked it up to paranoia. David had been staying at my place while I was in the hospital, and maybe he'd looked for something in my jewelry box to bring to me. Maybe Mom had been going through my mail to help me stay on top of bills. I was being silly. It was on day 3 that I reached for my engagement ring to put it on after showering and found the ring box empty. My heart stopped. Actually stopped. I stared at the empty velvet slot where my ring should have been, and my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I called for David, my voice coming out as a strangled whisper. "The ring," I said when he rushed into the bedroom. "Where's my ring?" We tore the apartment apart. We checked every surface, every drawer, every possible place it could have fallen. We emptied the jewelry box completely, shook out every piece of clothing, looked under furniture in the bathroom, in the kitchen. Everywhere, it was gone. David was pale, his hands shaking as he helped me search. "Could someone have taken it while you were in the hospital?" he asked gently. "I mean, who had keys?" My parents had keys. They'd been checking on the apartment, bringing in my mail, watering my plants. But no. No, that was impossible. They couldn't. I called my mom with David sitting beside me, his hand on my shoulder for support. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I can't find my engagement ring. It's not in my jewelry box where I left it. Do you know anything about it?" The pause was too long, way too long. "Oh, honey," she said finally, and there was something in her voice I couldn't identify. "Don't worry about that right now. You just focus on getting better." "What do you mean, don't worry about it?" "Mom, it's my engagement ring. It's worth $18,000. Where is it?" Another pause. "We had to make some difficult decisions while you were in the hospital." My blood went cold. What kind of difficult decisions? "The party for Jake, it's more expensive than we thought. And with Dad not working and you having all these medical bills coming," she took a breath, "we needed to access some assets." "Assets?" She called my engagement ring an asset. "You sold my ring." "We pawned it," she said quickly, as if that made it better. "It's not sold. We can get it back when Dad finds work, or maybe you can use some of your wedding money too." I hung up. I actually hung up on my mother for the first time in my life. David was staring at me, his face white. "They pawned it," he whispered. I couldn't speak. I just sat there on my bed, still wearing my hospital bracelet because I'd forgotten to cut it off, still weak from surgery, and felt my world tilt completely off its axis. My parents had taken my engagement ring. While I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from surgery, trusting them with my home and my life, they had gone into my bedroom, opened my jewelry box, and taken the ring my fiancé had saved 2 years to buy me. They took it to a pawn shop and traded it for cash to throw a party for my brother. The ring David had presented to me in front of my entire family. The ring that symbolized our future, our love, our commitment. The ring I'd been showing off to friends and coworkers for months. The ring I'd been staring at during painful moments in the hospital, reminding myself that I had something beautiful to look forward to. Gone, pawned. Turned into party decorations and catered appetizers. David tried to comfort me, but I could see it in his eyes too. The hurt, the betrayal. This wasn't just about money, this was about respect, about trust. About the fact that my own parents thought so little of me and our relationship that they could just take something so precious and intimate without even asking. When I finally called them back an hour later, my voice was eerily calm. "Which pawn shop?" "Honey, let's talk about this." "Which pawn shop, Mom?" She gave me the address. I drove there the next day, against doctor's orders, still weak and sore from surgery. The pawn shop owner was a kind older man who clearly felt uncomfortable when I explained the situation. "Your mother said it was hers," he said apologetically. "She had identification, said it was a family heirloom she needed to sell for medical expenses." "I'm sorry, I had no reason to doubt her." He showed me the paperwork. They'd gotten $4,000 for it. $4,000 for a ring worth $18,000. Pawn shops never give full value, I knew that, but seeing it in black and white made me physically sick. "I can give you the option to buy it back for $4,000 plus fees and interest," he offered kindly. "I haven't put it in the display case yet." $4,000. I had about $800 in my checking account. My savings had been depleted by medical bills that insurance didn't cover, and I'd already taken unpaid leave from work for my recovery. I couldn't ask David to pay to buy back his own ring. The thought made me want to disappear into the floor. The ring stayed at the pawn shop. That night, David and I had one of the hardest conversations of our relationship. He wasn't angry at me, he kept saying. He was angry for me, but I could see the doubt creeping in. Not doubt about our love, but doubt about my family, about what he was marrying into, about whether this was something he wanted to deal with for the rest of his life. How could they do that? He kept asking. How could anyone do that? I didn't have an answer. I kept thinking about all the years I'd covered for them, all the times I'd made excuses for Jake getting special treatment, all the times I'd convinced myself that their favoritism didn't really matter because I was independent. I didn't need their approval. But this wasn't about needing approval. This was about basic human decency, about respecting boundaries, about understanding that some things are sacred and you don't touch them no matter what. The party was scheduled for the following Saturday. Throughout the week, I got excited texts from family members who'd been invited, asking if I was feeling well enough to attend. Aunts and uncles and cousins who'd heard about the big celebration Jake was getting, the celebration my ring had paid for. I didn't respond to most of the texts. I was trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to hide in my apartment and pretend none of it was happening. Part of me wanted to show up and make a scene. Part of me wanted to call Jake and tell him what had happened, force him to call off the party. But Jake already knew. Of course he knew. I figured that out when my Aunt Linda called me Thursday afternoon. Aunt Linda is my dad's sister, and she's never been one to mince words or stay out of family drama. I heard about your ring, she said without preamble. I think it's disgusting. Jake told you. Jake didn't tell me anything, but he didn't have to. Your mother was bragging to my sister Karen about how they'd found creative financing for the party. Karen put two and two together when she remembered seeing you show off that ring at Christmas. She called me, and I called Jake directly. My stomach dropped. What did he say? He said your parents told him they'd gotten permission from you. Said you'd offered to help pay for the party, and this was the easiest way to access the money. I was quiet for a long time. That's a lie. I know it's a lie, sweetheart. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Well, I do. I'm going to that party, and I'm bringing Karen with me. And if nobody else is going to tell those people the truth about what they've done, we will. That conversation changed everything. Knowing that Jake had been told I'd given permission, that he was going ahead with the party anyway, that he was letting everyone believe I'd willingly sacrificed my engagement ring for his celebration, it flipped a switch in me that I didn't even know existed. I'd spent my whole life being the easygoing middle child, the one who didn't cause problems, who kept the peace, who made excuses for everyone else's behavior. But sitting in my apartment, still recovering from surgery, staring at my empty ring finger, I felt something I'd never felt before. Pure cold fury, but not the kind of fury that explodes, the kind that calculates. I started making phone calls. First, I called the country club where the party was being held. I spoke to the event coordinator, a woman named Mrs. Peterson who'd been there for 20 years and had a reputation for running a tight ship. I'm calling about the party on Saturday for Jake Thompson, I said. I'm his sister and I wanted to confirm some details. Of course, it's going to be lovely. Your parents have put together quite the celebration. Yes, they have. I was wondering, did they put down the full payment, or will there be a balance due on the night of the event? Let me check. Yes, they paid half as a deposit, and the remaining balance of $3,200 is due before the event begins on Saturday. $3,200. They still owed $3,200, money they presumably thought they'd have from pawning my ring, but money they'd already spent on other party expenses. And if that balance isn't paid... Mrs. Peterson's voice became more formal. Well, then we wouldn't be able to proceed with the event, of course. The contract is very clear about payment terms. I understand, thank you so much. My second call was to my cousin Marcus, who worked as a videographer for local events. He'd done several family weddings and was good at his job, professional but unobtrusive. Hey Marcus, it's Sarah, I have a strange request. What's up? I need you to film Jake's party on Saturday. But I need you to film everything. Not just the highlights, but all of it, the whole thing. Okay, any particular reason? I'll explain later. How much would you charge for something like that? For family, just cover my gas and buy me dinner afterward. But Sarah, what's going on? I'll tell you everything on Saturday, just trust me, okay? My third call was to David. I want to go to the party. Sarah, I don't think that's a good idea. You're still recovering and being around your family right now. I want to go, I need to go, will you come with me? There was a long pause. Of course I'll come with you, but what are you planning? I'm planning to tell the truth. Saturday arrived crisp and clear. one of those perfect early spring days that makes you believe in new beginnings. I'd spent the morning getting ready, taking longer with my hair and makeup than I had since before I got sick. I wore my favorite dress, the navy blue one that David always said brought out my eyes. I looked good. I looked healthy. I looked like someone who had her life together. I did not look like someone whose own parents had pawned her engagement ring to pay for her brother's party. David picked me up at 2 o'clock. The party started at 3 o'clock, but I wanted to arrive early. Mrs. Peterson had agreed to meet with me beforehand, though she didn't know why. "You look beautiful," David said, kissing my cheek as I got in the car. "But are you sure about this?" I've never been more sure about anything in my life. The country club looked elegant, decorated with green and gold balloons, Jake's high school colors. There was a banner stretched across the entrance to the banquet hall. "Congratulations, Jake, Denver, here you come." Someone had put a lot of thought into the decorations. They'd used family photos from throughout Jake's life, created centerpieces with his achievements, even had a memory table with his high school football jersey. It was beautiful, it was expensive, it was paid for with my engagement ring. I found Mrs. Peterson in her office, a small, efficient woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. "Miss Thompson, how lovely to finally meet you. Your parents speak of you often." "I'm sure they do, Mrs. Peterson. I need to discuss the payment situation for today's event." Her expression became more guarded. "Is there a problem with the final payment?" "There might be. But before we get to that, I need you to understand something about how this party was funded." I told her everything. About the hospital stay, about coming home to find my ring missing, about the pawn shop, about my parents lying to everyone about having my permission. I showed her photos of the ring from our engagement announcement, the pawn shop receipt. I'd gotten a copy of text messages between me and my mother. Mrs. Peterson's face grew more and more concerned as I spoke. "This is very irregular," she said finally, "and very troubling." "I'm not trying to ruin my brother's party," I said, "but I need people to know the truth, and I need to know that if my parents can't make the final payment, you won't be left holding the bag. The final payment is due in 30 minutes. I know. They'll probably try to put it on a credit card that gets declined. They don't have the money. They spent everything they got from pawning my ring on other aspects of the party." Mrs. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. "What would you like me to do?" "I'd like you to give them a chance to make the payment. If they can, the party goes on as planned. If they can't," I took a breath, "I'll pay it. But in exchange, I want 5 minutes with the microphone before the speeches begin." 5 minutes? 5 minutes to tell everyone exactly how this party was funded. Mrs. Peterson studied me carefully. "You know this will create quite a scene." "I'm counting on it." At 2:50, guests started arriving. I watched through the window of Mrs. Peterson's office as my family members walked into the country club, dressed in their best clothes, carrying gifts for Jake, smiling and laughing. Aunt Linda and Aunt Karen arrived together, both giving me discreet nods when they spotted me. Marcus arrived with his camera equipment, setting up unobtrusively in the corners of the room. At 2:58, my parents arrived with Jake and Emma. Mom was wearing her best dress, the one she'd bought for my engagement party. Dad looked handsome in his suit, the one he'd worn to walk Emma down the aisle at her high school graduation. Jake looked genuinely happy, surrounded by family and friends who'd come to celebrate his success. I felt a pang of something, not regret exactly, but sadness. This could have been a beautiful day. It could have been a family celebration filled with love and joy and pride. Instead, it was going to be something else entirely. At 3 o'clock, Mrs. Peterson approached my parents about the final payment. I couldn't hear the conversation from her office, but I could see their faces. Mom's bright smile faltering. Dad pulling out his wallet, then a credit card, then another credit card. Jake looking confused, then concerned, then panicked. At 3:05, Mrs. Peterson returned to her office. 3 declined credit cards, she said simply. I handed her my check for $3,200. Money I'd scraped together from my emergency fund, money I'd been saving for wedding expenses, money I couldn't really afford to spend. But this wasn't about the money. This had never been about the money. "Thank you," Mrs. Peterson said. "I'll let them know the payment has been resolved, and then you'll have your 5 minutes." The party began at 3:15. I entered through a side door, David at my side, and took a seat at a table in the back. Several people saw me and waved, smiling, probably assuming I was feeling better and had made it after all. Jake saw me and looked relieved, coming over immediately. "Sarah, I'm so glad you're here. I was worried you wouldn't make it." I looked at him, my big brother, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd scared away boys who were mean to me in middle school, who'd helped me study for my nursing boards. He looked genuinely happy to see me. I wouldn't miss it, I said. After all, I helped pay for it. His smile flickered slightly. Yeah, Mom mentioned you wanted to contribute. That was really generous of you. Generous, I repeated the word like I was tasting it. That's an interesting way to put it. Before he could respond, Mrs. Peterson took the microphone at the front of the room. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special celebration of Jake Thompson. Before we begin the formal program, one of Jake's family members has asked to say a few words. The room quieted, and all eyes turned to me as I made my way to the front. I could feel my heart pounding, but my hands were steady as I took the microphone. Thank you all for being here today, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I know you're all here because you care about Jake and want to celebrate this amazing opportunity he's been given. Nods and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I also know that many of you have been wondering how my parents managed to put together such an elaborate celebration, given that my father has been out of work for several months. The room was completely silent now. I could see my parents at their table, Mom gripping Dad's arm, both of them staring at me with growing horror. I'd like to solve that mystery for you. I held up my left hand, my ring finger conspicuously bare. 2 weeks ago, while I was in the hospital recovering from emergency surgery for a perforated appendix, my parents entered my apartment using their spare key. They went into my bedroom, opened my jewelry box, and removed my $18,000 engagement ring. Gasps echoed throughout the room. Several people turned to stare at my parents. They then took that ring, given to me by my fiancé David, who saved for 2 years to buy it, to a pawn shop where they sold it for $4,000. They used that money to help fund this party. The silence was deafening now. I could see Jake's face, white with shock and horror. Emma had her hand over her mouth. Several relatives were looking between my parents and me with expressions of disbelief. When I discovered what had happened and confronted them about it, they told me that family comes first and that I should be happy to contribute to Jake's celebration. They told Jake that I had given them permission to sell the ring, which is a lie. I pulled out my phone and held it up. I have text messages, pawn shop receipts, and witnesses who can verify everything I'm telling you. My parents stole from me while I was hospitalized, lied to my brother about it, and expected me to smile and pretend everything was fine. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some standing up from their tables, several relatives approaching my parents with angry expressions. I could see Jake pushing through the crowd, trying to reach me. I'm telling you this not to ruin Jake's celebration, I continued, raising my voice to be heard over the noise, but because I'm tired of being the family member who keeps quiet, who doesn't make waves, who lets things slide in the name of keeping the peace. Some things are too important to let slide. I handed the microphone back to Mrs. Peterson and walked calmly toward the exit, David right beside me. Behind us, I could hear raised voices, my mother crying, Jake calling my name. We made it to the parking lot before Jake caught up with us. Sarah, wait, please. I turned around. My big brother, the golden child, looked devastated. I didn't know, he said, his voice breaking. I swear to God, I didn't know they stole it. They told me you'd offered to help, that you'd suggested using the ring as collateral for a loan or something. I never would have agreed to this if I'd known they took it without permission. I studied his face. I could see the truth there, the genuine horror and shame. Jake had many faults, but he wasn't a thief and he wasn't cruel. The party's paid for, I said quietly. The final payment they couldn't make, I covered it. So go back in there and celebrate with your friends. But Jake, I paused, you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. Because the way our parents have treated me my entire life, the favoritism, the dismissal, the assumption that my feelings and my boundaries don't matter benefited from all of that. And now you get to choose whether you're okay with that or not. He stood there in the parking lot, tears running down his face as David and I drove away. The aftermath was swift and devastating for my parents. Aunt Linda had recorded my speech on her phone and posted it to the family Facebook group with the caption, in case anyone missed what just happened at Jake's party. Within hours, it had been shared dozens of times, with comments from relatives expressing their shock and anger at what my parents had done. My cousin Michelle, who worked at a bank, commented that what they'd done was technically theft and could be prosecuted. My uncle Robert, a lawyer, agreed and suggested I file a police report. Several relatives who'd given my parents money over the years started asking whether their loans had actually gone to help family members or to fund Jake's preferences. The questions multiplied. How many times had they lied about expenses? How many times had they asked for money for family emergencies that were actually just things they wanted to buy for Jake? how much of the financial help they'd received from extended family over the years had been obtained through deception. Jake called me the next day. "I've called off the move to Denver," he said. "What? Why?" "Jake, don't do that because of. I'm not taking the promotion. I'm staying here, getting a second job, and I'm going to pay you back every penny they stole. $18,000, not the $4,000 they got from the pawn shop. The full value of what they took from you." "Jake, you don't have to." "Yes, I do, and I'm also going to pay back everyone in the family who gave them money because they thought it was for emergencies or medical bills or whatever other lies they told. I've been going through Mom's papers, and there's a lot of it, Sarah. A lot. It took Jake 3 years to pay back everyone, working 2 jobs and living with roommates to keep his expenses low. He never did take that promotion to Denver, though similar opportunities came up later. The company understood when he explained the family situation, and he eventually moved up within the local branch instead. My parents tried to reconcile with me several times. Mom sent cards, Dad called and left voicemails. They even showed up at my apartment once with tears and apologies, but their apologies always came with excuses. They were stressed about money. They thought I'd understand. They assumed I'd want to help Jake. They never just said we were wrong and were sorry. The final straw came 6 months later, at Emma's graduation from art school. I attended because it was Emma's day, not theirs, but when Mom introduced me to some of her friends, she said, "This is Sarah, our daughter who's been going through a difficult time lately." A difficult time, as if I were the problem. As if I were the one who'd behaved badly. I left the graduation early and never attended another family event where my parents would be present. David and I postponed our wedding while we worked through what had happened. The violation of trust hadn't just been between me and my parents, it had affected our relationship too. David needed time to process what it meant to marry into a family capable of such betrayal, and I needed time to figure out who I was when I wasn't constantly making excuses for other people's bad behavior. We did eventually get married 2 years later in a small ceremony with just his family and the relatives of mine who'd stood by me. Aunt Linda walked me down the aisle. Jake was there, as was Emma, who'd finally understood what our parents had done and had started keeping her distance from them as well. The ring David gave me for that wedding was different from the first one, smaller, less expensive, but chosen together and paid for with money we'd saved as a couple. I loved it more than the first ring because it represented something the first one hadn't, a relationship built on honesty and mutual respect, free from the toxic dynamics I'd grown up thinking were normal. It's been 5 years since Jake's party. I still have the recording Marcus made of the entire event. I've watched it a few times, and it's surreal to see myself standing at that microphone, calmly explaining to a room full of people how my parents had betrayed me. The woman in that video looks so composed, so sure of herself. I barely recognize her as the same person who used to make excuses for everyone else's behavior. The truth is, I didn't plan to expose them that day. I'd gone to the party planning to have a private conversation with Jake, to tell him what really happened and let him decide what to do with the information. But when I saw all those people celebrating, all those relatives who'd helped my parents financially over the years thinking they were contributing to genuine family needs, I realized that the lie was bigger than just me and my ring. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled it differently, kept it private, tried to work things out within the family. The answer is no. I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret refusing to be the family member who quietly absorbs everyone else's bad behavior in the name of keeping the peace. I don't regret showing my younger relatives that you don't have to accept being treated badly just because the people mistreating you are related to you. My relationship with Jake has actually gotten stronger over the years. He kept his word about paying me back, but more importantly, he made genuine changes in how he interacted with our family dynamics. He started calling out our parents when they played favorites with Emma's kids. He stopped accepting expensive gifts when he knew they couldn't afford them. He became the brother I'd always hoped he could be, instead of just the golden child who never had to think about anyone else's feelings. Emma and I talk regularly now. She was only 22 when all this happened, and it took her some time to understand the bigger patterns in our family. But once she started paying attention, she saw it too, the way I'd been treated as disposable, as the family member whose needs and feelings mattered least. She's made different choices in her relationship with our parents as a result. As for my parents, we're not no contact exactly, but we're very low contact. We exchange Christmas cards. I attended Dad's retirement party last year, though I left early. If there was a medical emergency, I would be there. But I'm no longer the daughter who drops everything to help them, who loans them money, who makes excuses for their behavior to other relatives. It's not because I don't love them, I do love them, but I finally understand that love and enabling aren't the same thing, and that protecting yourself from people who hurt you isn't cruel, it's necessary. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the public confrontation or the family fallout. It was accepting that the parents I'd wanted to have, the ones who would put all their children's needs on equal footing, who would never violate such a basic boundary, who would apologize sincerely when they hurt someone, weren't the parents I actually had. I'd spent 28 years making excuses for them, telling myself that their favoritism toward Jake was just because he was more successful, or that their dismissal of my achievements was because I was more independent. I'd convinced myself that their love was conditional on my usefulness, and that if I just kept being helpful and undemanding, eventually I'd earn the same consideration they showed my siblings. But standing in that country club, looking at a party funded by my stolen engagement ring, I finally understood that no amount of being good was going to change how they saw me. I wasn't their daughter who deserved protection and respect. I was their resource, the one they could take from because I wouldn't fight back. Well, I fought back, and it changed everything. The investigation that followed my public revelation uncovered even more deception than Jake had initially found. It turned out my parents had been running a sophisticated manipulation campaign with extended family for years. They told my Aunt Susan that they needed money for my medical bills while I was in the hospital, collecting over $2,000 that I never saw. They told my Uncle Mark that Jake needed help with a security deposit for his new apartment in Denver, getting another $1,500 for an apartment he never rented. They'd created fake emergencies, exaggerated real ones, and played family members against each other to maximize their take. My hospitalization hadn't been the first time they'd used my life as a fundraising opportunity without my knowledge. It was just the first time I'd found out about it. The family meeting that followed was unlike anything we'd ever had. Aunt Linda organized it, held at her house on a Sunday afternoon that I'll never forget. 23 relatives showed up, armed with receipts, bank statements, and years of suppressed suspicions. My parents sat on Linda's couch like defendants in a trial, which in a way they were. One by one, relatives stood up and listed the money they'd given, the reasons they'd been told it was needed, and what they'd discovered about where it actually went. My cousin Bate had given them $800 for emergency car repairs that turned out to be party supplies for Jake's high school graduation. My Uncle Richard had provided $1,200 for unexpected medical expenses that coincided exactly with a weekend trip my parents took to Vegas. My grandmother, my 90-year-old grandmother, had been giving them $50 a month for 3 years because they'd told her I was struggling to pay my nursing school loans, money that I never received. The total came to just over $14,000 in fraudulent requests over 5 years. $14,000 stolen through lies and manipulation from people who trusted them, who loved them, who wanted to help family members in need. But here's what struck me most about that meeting. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal of trust, the weaponization of family bonds, the calculated way they'd identified each person's soft spots and exploited them. They'd told my grandmother I was struggling because they knew she had a special fondness for me. They'd told my uncle about car troubles because he was mechanically inclined and would want to help. They'd spun medical emergencies because our family had a history of rallying around health crises. They'd turned our family's greatest strength, our willingness to help each other, into their personal ATM. During that meeting, my mother cried. She apologized, said they'd never meant for it to go so far, claimed they'd always intended to pay everyone back. My father was quieter, but he nodded along, adding that they'd been desperate, that losing his job had made them panic, that they'd made bad decisions but hadn't meant to hurt anyone. I watched them perform this remorse and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even disappointment. Just a cold, clear recognition that this was who they were, and no amount of tears or excuses was going to change that. The family decided on consequences. My parents would pay back every penny they'd fraudulently obtained, with interest. They would be removed from all family group chats and mailing lists until the debts were satisfied. They would not be invited to family gatherings where financial planning or assistance was discussed. They would submit to having their finances monitored by Uncle Richard, who was an accountant, if they ever asked for help again. Most importantly, they would have no access to any family member's personal property, homes, or financial information. No more spare keys, no more helping with mail or bills, no more being trusted with anything that could be converted to cash. They agreed to all of it because what choice did they have? But I could see in their faces that they thought it was excessive, that we were all overreacting, that they were the real victims here. 3 months later, I got a call from Emma. "They're asking me for money," she said. They want to borrow $500 for groceries, and they're saying the family is being cruel by refusing to help them while they're struggling. What did you tell them? I told them to ask Uncle Richard to review their budget and approve the request, like we all agreed. Mom started crying and said I was treating them like children. What did you say to that? Emma was quiet for a moment. I said that children don't usually steal from their other children, so maybe the comparison wasn't as insulting as she thought. I was proud of Emma in that moment. She'd learned to see through their manipulation, to recognize that helping them avoid consequences wasn't actually helping them at all. It took my parents 2.5 years to pay back the family money, and nearly 4 years to pay me back the full value of my ring. Jake helped them with a portion of it, as did Emma eventually, but they had to do most of it themselves through budgeting, downsizing, and taking on extra work. During those years, I watched them go through what looked like genuine change. They sold their house and moved to a smaller one. Dad took a job that was below his previous position but provided steady income. Mom got her first job in 15 years, working part-time at a department store. They stopped throwing expensive parties. They stopped buying elaborate gifts they couldn't afford. They started living within their means, maybe for the first time in their adult lives. But the thing about consequences is that they're not just punishment, they're information. And what I learned about my parents during those years was that they were capable of change when they had no other choice, but that the changes were motivated by necessity, not by genuine remorse or understanding. They never acknowledged the emotional damage they'd caused. They never showed real understanding of why what they'd done was so hurtful. They paid back the money because they had to, but they never stopped seeing themselves as the victims of their children's inflexibility. The last conversation I had with my mother was about 6 months ago. She called to tell me they'd made the final payment to Uncle Richard, that they'd satisfied all their debts to the family, and that she hoped we could put all this behind us now. I'm glad you've paid everyone back, I told her. That was the right thing to do. So can we go back to normal now? Can you come to Sunday dinner again? Can we be a family again? I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Mom, do you understand why I stopped coming to family dinners? Because you were angry about the ring. It wasn't about the ring, it was about what the ring represented. It was about the fact that you thought so little of me and my relationship that you could just take something precious and intimate without asking. It was about discovering that you'd been lying to the family about me for years, using my life to manipulate other people into giving you money. But we've paid everyone back. Paying someone back doesn't undo the betrayal, Mom. It's the bare minimum of what you owed. It doesn't address why you thought it was okay to do it in the first place. She was quiet for a moment. Then, so what do you want from us? What do we have to do to make this right? I want you to understand why it was wrong. Not just that it caused problems or had consequences, but why it was fundamentally wrong to treat me the way you did. I want you to see me as your daughter, who deserves the same respect and consideration you've always shown Jake. I want you to acknowledge that the favoritism was real and damaging. Another pause. I don't think we played favorites. We just gave each of you what united. And there it was. After all those years, all those consequences, all that forced change in their behavior, they still couldn't see it. They still couldn't admit that they'd treated their children differently, that they'd valued Jake's happiness over my well-being, that they'd seen me as a resource rather than a person. Then I guess we don't have anything else to talk about, I said gently and hung up. I didn't feel angry or sad ending that call. I felt free. Free from the hope that they would change, free from the obligation to keep trying to make them understand, free from the belief that family relationships are worth preserving no matter how toxic they are. Some people think I'm too harsh. They say parents make mistakes, that families should forgive each other, that I should be grateful they raised me and provided for me. They say I'm holding grudges, that I'm punishing them for being human. But here's what I've learned. Forgiveness doesn't require ongoing relationship. You can forgive someone and still recognize that they're not safe to have in your life. You can love your parents and still protect yourself from their patterns of behavior. You can be grateful for the good things they provided, while also acknowledging the damage they caused. And you can choose to break generational patterns instead of perpetuating them. David and I have 2 children now, a 4-year-old daughter named Lily and a 2-year-old son named James. When I watch David with them, I see what parental love looks like when it's not conditional, not manipulative, not based on what the children can provide in return. He celebrates Lily's artistic attempts with the same enthusiasm, whether she draws a masterpiece or a stick figure. He doesn't compare James to other children or make him feel like he needs to earn love through achievement. He respects their boundaries, asks permission before going through their things, apologizes sincerely when he makes mistakes. My children will never wonder whether their father loves them. They'll never question whether they're good enough, worthy enough, useful enough to deserve respect and consideration. They'll never have to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation because their family will never put them in that position. That's my gift to them and my gift to myself. The knowledge that cycles of dysfunction don't have to continue, that children deserve better than what I received, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that damages your soul. The ring from the pawn shop was eventually sold to someone else. I never tried to get it back, even after I could afford to. That ring represented a chapter of my life when I was still trying to be the daughter my parents wanted, still hoping that being good enough would earn me the love and respect I craved. The ring David gave me for our actual wedding represents something different, a relationship built on honesty, respect, and genuine partnership, a love that doesn't require me to diminish myself or accept mistreatment. A future where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to that party, if I'd just let the whole thing slide like I'd let so many other things slide over the years. Maybe my parents would have gotten away with it. Maybe they would have continued their pattern of manipulation and theft. Maybe I would have spent the rest of my life being the family member who absorbed everyone else's bad behavior in the name of keeping the peace. But I did go to that party. I did tell the truth. I did refuse to be the victim of their choices anymore. And while the consequences were painful, losing the relationship with my parents that I'd always hoped to have, watching my family fracture, dealing with years of drama and conflict, I wouldn't change it. Because on the other side of that pain was freedom. Freedom to have relationships based on